This book project is the result of rather long history of interdisciplinary collaboration, which began a number of years ago. With
15 years ago.
Maybe 15 years ago. At the time, Steve was a member of a technical recovery team for the restoration of salmon runs in the Columbia Basin. And at the time, we got a grant to do an interdisciplinary project, and we applied for it and received the grant. And the focus of the analysis was salmon recovery in the Columbia Basin. And the issue was one of analysis of science, and the other one an analysis of the theological and ethical implications of the science. And what was interesting is that at the time in which this grant was given, the Roman Catholic bishops in the watershed had just released a major document called the Columbia River Watershed, Caring for Creation and the Common Good. So the Columbia River Pastoral Letter, as it's also known, became a major theological analysis of the issues in the Columbia Basin. And the people who had given us this grant had already been aware of this document and asked us if we knew anything about it. And of course, the story is that Steve was on the steering committee and I was on the resource committee for the document. So Salmon became a focal point for interdisciplinary collaboration regarding what was going on in terms of the science, which I think you need to speak to, and what were the implications, what were the ethical implications for what the science was doing, because the science was not necessarily scientific.
So science is real good at describing the physical world. It's real good at describing current states of systems. Using modeling, you can extend that to begin to try to describe alternative future states of the system. It was in the process of the construction of the alternative models that the fisheries biologists were making for the Columbia Basin that it became real apparent to me that some of the assumptions going into the models, which were driving sort of alternative futures, were actually assumptions that had significant ethical components to them. Questions are difficult for scientists to engage with without a construction in which you're operating. So when you say, we're going to recover salmon, the question is, what does recovery mean? What does recovery look like? How many fish is that? How big does the population have to be? How widely distributed does it have to be? In this circumstance, there were things being said like having populations with less than a 5% extinction risk over a 100-year period of time was a goal that was trying to be achieved. Did that really sound like recovery, or was that a scientific sounding, ethically driven decision about what an acceptable alternative state is? Science has within it the tools to examine the world and to project futures, but it really doesn't have within it the tools to deal with ethical analysis. I could identify the assumptions of the models that had ethical components, but scientists are not really trained in ethical analysis, and that's where a theological approach and a combination of analytical techniques became useful.
So one of the primary points of connection was basically a value analysis of what appeared to be science. And what Steve just mentioned is, well, what does recovery mean? And we came to the conclusion that recovery basically meant delisting. It basically meant the minimum amount of salmon you needed to delist them from the endangered within the context of the Endangered Species Act. And that's a judgment. That's not a scientific, that's a value judgment. And so one of the points of collaboration became an axiological analysis, a value analysis of this particular species. And it's clear that this species, from the perspective of those driving the process of recovery, was basically a utilitarian valuation of salmon. And there are peoples in the basin who have more than just a utilitarian valuation of salmon, such as tribal peoples. You have their valuation of salmon is far more religious and culturally embedded. You have a first salmon ceremony. Salmon, from a Catholic perspective, could be considered sacramental. Consequently, you have a very interesting analysis of salmon that does not appear in the scientific documents.